Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and knock this out. Alright, first question. Since delts seem to be volume resistant for nattys, do you think doing more than 20 sets per week is a good idea, specifically the mid and rear delt? Thanks in advance. I don't know that that's really the right term I would use for nattys. I think what you mean is they grow slower in proportion for nattys. That's one of the big differences you see a lot of times with guys who use a lot of gear is that the delts tend to grow faster. Delts and traps tend to grow faster in proportion to other muscles, and it's because of the androgen receptor count in those muscles. It's higher than in other muscles. Therefore, they respond more to androgens. Notice I said specifically androgens. It's not all drugs. There are a lot of drugs that bodybuilders and lifters use to build muscle that are not anabolics, right? They're not androgens. They're not testosterone derivatives, or as what you guys would call steroids. So those other things are completely different. But for the androgens, it matters. So I would say they're not really volume resistant difference. Now, delts do seem to need a large amount of volume, and it has to do with the fact that delts are used so much. They're used in pretty much any upper body movement other than just bending the elbow, right? If you do anything with your upper body that is more than just bending the elbow with your arms in a fixed position, your delts are going to get worked. Therefore, they need higher workloads because they're designed for higher workloads. But it's also because they have multiple different functions of 3 different heads. So when we start talking about doing more than 20 sets, if you're talking about more than 20 sets for one head, probably not. Probably not. Do I think where the lack of work is usually the rear delt? That's the reason guys struggle with delt development, is because they don't work their upper back. They don't work their upper back correctly. And what people forget when you start looking at studies, you look at any of the EMG data, and I know EMG is not the be-all, end-all. What do you find? Every single last rear delt exercise actually hits the side delts really effectively. Front delt exercises trickle over, but a little bit less. Now, most of us, if we're doing a lot of pressing, we're getting the front delts quite well, especially if you're doing multiple different presses. If you're flat benching and incline benching, oh yeah, your front delts are getting a lot of work. It's going to be some carryover to the side delt. But a lot of guys want to spend too much time, I think, focusing just on the side delt without realizing that usually the best rear delt exercises all work the side delt. So if you're going to put extra focus and you're going to try to get 20 sets a week, it should be rear delts. And with the added caveat that rows are rear delt exercise. And technically, if you look a little closer at some of the data, a lot of rows actually seem to hit the side delts decently well. So you need to be counting your rowing. So if you're doing a lot of rowing, let's say you're doing 10 sets of rows every week total, you don't need a whole lot of extra delt work. If you do, I would focus more on rear delt things like face pulls, reverse flies, things like that. That's where I would personally put my efforts. That's what I would recommend, because that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. Okay, that's where it's going to happen, because it's going to carry over, especially if you're already doing like incline or overhead work with any appreciable volume, like at least 5 sets a week of either one of those. That's where I would put my focus. You'll be just fine. But you don't need to be exceeding 20 sets for any of those heads. You're not going to get good results from that. All right, next question. I tore my rotator cuff in June while benching. I've had surgery and I'm through rehab, so I've got to go ahead to return to normal lifting. How do you suggest working through the mental part of getting back under a bar? That's a rough one. Really, when you say rotator cuff, though, you should probably specify, because as far as what you can tear on the bench press, actually your biggest rotator cuff it's never going to happen on bench press. It's not going to happen. So you're talking about one of the two ones in the front, right? Not the ones in the back. People forget that, and I get that with a lot of clients. And this is just a side note. Some of my younger lifters, oh, my rotator cuff hurts after they did some benching with bad form. And I'm like, well, how do you know it's your rotator cuff? And which one of your rotators? You're like, what? The cuff. I'm like, no. The rotator cuffs are 4 individual muscles. Roughly 2 of them are in the front of the body and 2 of them are in the back. Again, your infraspinatus actually is a pretty big muscle. It's actually big, and it runs all the way to your spine. All the way to your spine. Okay, that's one of your rotator cuffs. That's the biggest one. But I'm sure because you said rotator, it's one of those. It's not, you don't mean like a labrum tear or anything. So, because again, you had it surgically repaired. Well, here's what I'm going to say. I know that I'm not going to give rehab advice because I know your doctor has already given you that. Your surgeon will have already discussed rehab. I'm sure you've gone through rehab. The mental aspects. Start slow. Okay, start slow. The other thing to think about when you're getting back under the barbell is to ask yourself, how did this happen? Was it over? And be honest with yourself. If you want to really get through the mental aspects, you can't lie to yourself. Because we know on a deep personal level subconsciously if we're bullshitting ourselves. Was it your form that caused it, or was it an overuse issue? Okay. If it was an overuse issue, you need to have more variation. Quit just coming in and flat benching. You need to do some dumbbell work. You do incline work. Limit your flat benching. Keep the sets low. Don't do more than 5 or 6 sets of bench a week. Tops. Stop doing sets to failure. Stop doing sets to failure. Stop that shit. Leads to overuse. It's how we get hurt. All right, that's one question you need to ask yourself. The other question you need to ask yourself is, what's your form look like? And that's going to be a big part of it. Start filming your benching. Start filming your benching so that you can see it. Maybe even put it up online. Maybe take it to some other coaches, some experts. Have them look at it. Make sure that you're benching correctly. Okay? A lot of shoulder issues are due to not benching correctly, not arching, trying to bench too flat back. Right? That is not the safe way to bench. Arching is the safest way on your shoulders. Are you pushing your chest up? Are you tight? Right? Are you locking out at the top of the head, letting your scapula come apart, shoulders roll forward? Are your triceps strong enough to keep the bar from drifting over your face on the lockout? Right? Make sure your triceps are strong. That'll help with shoulders. Make sure that you don't have the bar up in your palm. That will hurt your shoulders too. Okay, you need to make sure that the bar is stacked. You need to make sure you're keeping it in a good position, making sure that you have a good arch, making sure that you keep your chest up, your scapula retracted. So look at your form too, and be honest with yourself on it. Don't bullshit yourself about your form. Clean it up. Okay, these are the things that we do to address what we need to do to get back under the bar confidently and without a false confidence. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.